You know we are your natural allies, and we've worked together for many years. One thing that is a cardinal principle for us is to tell the truth at all times. We all knew the economy was in crisis, but some of the things I'm discovering myself, I mean, it's been a criminal handling of our economy. And Ghana is a crime scene, actually, because how a government can have been so reckless, I cannot understand. But we're faced with a reality, and our options are very few. We can behave like the ostrich and hide our heads in the sand and let the economy crash. But then what effect would it have on Ghanaian households and everybody? And so I've told him, I said, cut expenditure as much as you like. Even we ourselves in Office of Government Machinery cut as much of our budget as you like, because we all must make those sacrifices. A certain distrust of the political class has arisen, because it's like when everybody else is tightening their belts, the political class is loosening its belts. But I want to assure you that we're all going to tighten our belts, and there will be no wasteful expenditure. It is said that we create and share. And so let's start cooking the meal now so that we can share when we have created. But right now, the meal is not only insufficient, the cooking pot is even leaking. And so I'll just appeal to you that let's tamper our demands for this year. And once we get out of the woods, we've set good targets to bring inflation down so that the cost of everything will come down. We've set targets to grow the economy, to make things better. And when the cake is baked and is bigger, we'll share bigger. We are proposing an independent emoluments committee that would set the incomes for everybody from the president right down to the ordinary laborer. We're prepared to walk this journey with you, but I just appeal to you that let's reach agreement on this one so that we use this year as the year of correction. And then after we've corrected, we'll see how the economy continues to go. Once the economy moves in the direction that we are all hoping for, we all, if we have an independent emoluments committee, maybe if you suggest 35%, I'll support you because it will affect my pay too.
Joseph J. is a factory worker. Every day, he puts hours of hard work, but his salary barely covers his survival. 3 meals a day? That's a luxury he can't afford. For Joseph, lunch is the only proper meal he gets. His go-to choice? Beans and gari. It's cheap, filling, and keeps him going.
Thank you.
He comes to this popular joint in Kokomemle every afternoon, but even that is becoming too expensive.
Money, it can't help me because every day I eat 40 cedi, 50 cedi. That money there can't help me at all because it's small. It's small, yeah. A day is 30 cedi, 40 cedi price, okay for everybody. Yeah, because the 19 points is not good though. I can't do anything for me at all because I think 30 cedi or 40 cedi is okay for everybody.
A 10% wage increase was supposed to bring relief, but for Joseph, it barely covers the cost of one meal, let alone his transport, rent, or any other daily expenses. Across town, at another food joint, Benjamin Naughty shares his frustration.
I don't think 19 or 20 cedis would do something. Even what I eat in the afternoon will cost me, let me see, about 50 cedis. So giving me 19 cedis for a day, just look at it. Even giving your child, maybe, let me see, 10 cedis, what can he buy with that 20 cedis or 10 cedis? So 19 cedis, I don't think is good.
Benjamin's frustration is shared by many workers who feel the wage increase is out of touch with the reality of rising prices. Richard Adegu, another worker, spends 3 times the minimum wage daily, and he's not happy about it.
As a worker, to work and then be paying 90 pesos a day, Why are we slaves? Are we still slaves or what? How can you cater for yourself and then your family? You can't do anything. You can't move forward.
For Richard, the financial squeeze is real. The numbers simply don't add up. But not everyone is dissatisfied. Richard Kasim, for one, believes the government is making an effort.
Last year, the previous government increased it by 23%, right? So if less than 2 months, this government is able to increase by 10%, at least it will take part of my course I'll be making for the month, which is enough for me. It has taken part of my burdens off. It's going to take off e-levy. It's going to take off betting tax. Where is he going to get the money to be able to increase above the 10%? You have to know that he's squeezing from one end to another to make sure he will cushion us for us to feel okay in this country.
A 10% increase, some call it a step in the right direction. Others say it's nowhere near enough. But what do you think? Does 19 cedis 97 pesos a day make life better? Emmanuel Jivenu, Joy News, Accra.
Also, government in a move to boost workers' remuneration approved 10% base pay increase for organized labor, plus an increase in minimum wage to 19 cedis 97 pesos. But is this sexy for an IMF economy, as some people have labeled it? We'll take a look at concerns about the tendency of this move to trigger inflation and its ramifications for the ailing economy. Here on the big stories. Let's bring in our lead data analyst here at Joy News, Isaac Kofiaje, to help us break down the numbers here for us. But we also have with us on this particular discussion Lord Mensah, who is he's a finance person, a professor of finance at the University of Ghana. And then in studio with me is the Dean of Accounting and Finance at UPSA, Professor Isaac Body. So we have two professors on the show, plus Isaac Kofiaje. Isaac, let me start with you, Kofi. Break down the numbers for us in terms of what the government has announced and what it means for workers.
Right, Kojo. So this is usually a negotiation between government and other parties. And if you look at the 10% increment, last year when government announced 23% plus 2% at the last half of the year, we had a lot of noise about the increment. But this year things have actually been on the quiet. That means that possibly Labour actually got what they wanted, or even if they did not get, they were able to reach an equilibrium with government that they might feel it was satisfactory, especially looking at the picture that the president painted to them. But if we are looking at the numbers this morning, then what this 10% means is that it is actually illegal for any employer to pay their worker anything below 598 cedis, 95 pesos for a work done for a month. So if the minimum wage for a month should be 598 cedis, 95 pesos. If you compare this to what it used to be, let's say a year ago, that means that the figure has gone up by more than, I think, 100 cedis. So if you look at the next slide, that talks about the comparison between what the minimum monthly wage used to be a year ago versus what it used to be now, or per what the government has announced. In the next slide, that will do the comparison for us to know how this has actually gone up. So now we are looking at an increment from 544 cedis to now 598 cedis, 95 pesos. Any worker who works for a month should not be paid anything less than this. So if you are an employer, you pay somebody 400 cedis for a month, 500 cedis for a month, I think that you should start revising this way. This does not also mean that, employers should start increasing salaries. So, because there are already people who earn above the minimum wage. But definitely when you have these things, in full swing, it doesn't just affect salaries, but rather it also affects the pension contributions that especially government does for some of its public sector workers.
Okay.
If you look at the wage bill, for instance, the compensation of employees for government this year, it's not just about salaries, but also about some other remuneration contribution that government does on behalf of its workers. Now, on the screens now is the how minimum wage has been, looking at it from 2012 to 2025. And you have in red there the current minimum wage, which will take effect soon. But if you look at the next slide that talks about the magnitude of the increment, it tells you that it was just last year that we saw the outlier. I mean, last year was actually staggered into two, where you had a 23%, I think, first half of the year, and then you also had somewhere 25% at the latter parts of the year. And so if you compare that to what we've had previously, definitely last year was an outlier. The average usually has been around 10 to 11%. And so you will see that this does not fall outside the domain, or does not fall outside the bracket that we usually know. Possibly that's the reason why we didn't see a lot of noise, or we didn't hear a lot of noise from organized labor or from the workers, possibly. We understand that last year, for instance, they went to the negotiation table, tabling some 60% increment in minimum wage or base pay, but government decided that they could pay 23% and 25% at the last part of the year. We don't know the official demand from labor this year, but definitely looking at the picture that the president painted, they seem to have, bought into that, claim by the president, and have accepted the 10% increment, both in the base pay and also in the minimum wage, with the assurance that if things begin to get better, governments will definitely come in and then also, meet them halfway. But beyond this increment, what is the kind of fiscal burden that this could pose to government? Because already we know we do not have the 2025 budget in yet, but you can get a sense from the projections that the IMF did in their third review. And that is where we are picking our data from, looking at the projected compensation of employee bill for government this year. That's hovering around 73 billion Ghana cedis and forms about 35% of the total projected revenue and grants. If you compare it to tax revenue, you can see that, what government pays to its workers definitely takes more than 50% of our tax revenue.
Okay.
And if you add interest payments and all of that, debt servicing obligation for this year projected around 142 billion Ghana cedis, it really means that the government finds itself in a very tight corner.
Okay.
But with the assurance of labor, I think that possibly governments could find its way through this, maybe until next year when they come out with maybe another lucrative, increment.
Isaac, I'm grateful to you for joining us here. Now, Isaac Kofi is our lead data analyst here at Joy News. But let me bring you in studio and bring in Professor Isaac Body, Dean, Accounting and Finance, UPSA. Joining us on Zoom is Professor Lord Mensah, Professor of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Prof. Body, if you look at the 2024, Kofi said it was an outlier. Could it be because we're coming from a period where inflation was almost, was it 53 or so in the preceding year?
Yes, I appreciated the presentation of the researcher, giving us a view of the trend over the period. Before I comment on that, in Ghana, public sector wage increases have been shaped by four other conditions. Economic challenges will push people to demand for higher wages. If you also look at the government policies, can also cause people to demand for increment in wages. Structural changes are also part of the thing that can cause people to do that. And if you look at this over the period, you were asking a very good question of 2024, when we saw a high, a jump to about 23 or 23. I said it was good that we make reference to what can cause people to demand for, and I mentioned economic situation. So when situation where we have a higher and issues with the economy, and we think that price of items are going up, definitely people also will demand for. So we could talk about what happened in the Ukraine issues. We talk about the COVID. We're coming back from COVID and all that. We had a turbulent period over the period of time. So that could also speak to the fact that, yes, we demanded for. It was an outlier, if you saw the diagram. But I'm happy that over the period, we've been moving around between 10 to 11 on average. And I was surprised when the labor union took the 10%, because you can tell that it's woefully inadequate. But they have accepted. Maybe they have seen the trend and they realize that, well, this is the best the government can do.
The president also told them that things are not good at the moment. When things become better, I mean, yeah, they can all share in the pie.
It was assuring. And as a president, I'm sure that's the best way to speak to people, to tone down and wait for a better day to demand for some other remuneration. But let's also not forget this, that it's also important to mention, over the period, we can have a trend over the period. Remember the pre-2010, when we had a fragmented salary structure over the period. We're talking about in excess of about 20 to 30%. So in 2010, then we had introduction of single spine, and that was around that period. Then we also had 2012 to 2015. We had an annual adjustment.
The single spine was signed into effect 2009 when Kufuor was leaving.
But I think implementation took place, I'm sure.
Okay, yes.
That was when. Then in 2016 and 2020, you know, we had austerity and IMF constraints, and we had issues on that. Then 2021, 2023 was driven by inflation. And we're looking at a figure, I think it was around 20 to 30% or so. But remember, there was a COLA issue. Cost of living allowance came.
Yes.
And that the figure was around 15%, just giving a background to where we've come from over the period. And then we had 2023, there was a negotiation, and 30% was given. But they had to stagger it. There was 115% taking effect in 2023, and then 2024 over the period. So we've come far. But let's compare inflation rate and that of what we have been given. Anytime we are looking at an increment or workers are demanding for, a condition will necessitate that. The cost of living is too high. People obviously will demand for. So if you ask for my opinion, which I will come back again, whether 10% is good or not, at this stage, individual can check. And I will be able to make a very good assessment on this figure. Okay.
So the economic conditions play a role in what workers will be demanding in terms of increases in their wage. Let me bring in Professor Lord Mensah. Prof, some other people have described this as excessive because this is an economy that is not too strong. Will you agree with those people that this 10% increment is excessive for the economy, looking at where we are now?
Well, good morning to our viewers and good morning to my colleague at the studio. I can tell you that, yes, indeed, the 10%, I mean, looking at the public purse and what is happening, I would say it is something mere, but it's better than nothing. If you look at, the happenings on the grounds, I always tell myself that what will cause labor to call for demand for, an increase in salary. If you look at the sentiment around inflation, it's one of the key detectors of, labor call for increase in salaries. I mean, if Labour expect inflation to go up. Obviously, sitting by the table, I can tell you that they will always ask for an increase. Now, if you trace back in the years, I will not use, looking at the examples that are being given in the studio, I will not use 2024 as, a benchmark in determining, what do we call it, economic numbers. When it comes
why so?
Yeah, because it's an election year. And we know election years, economic numbers are always in outlying space. And because the government can go all out, to put out something to convince, labor. But then also, let's not forget about the goodwill that the current administration is enjoying. And also, going to the negotiation table and the president himself sitting right there. Sometimes it has a way of, causing kind of psychological, demand, down. Let me put it that way, because, you least expect the president to be sitting at the middle of, such negotiations. It shows a sign of openness. And for me, Labour couldn't ask for more because, the president was sitting right there and, more or less opening up the economy to them.
Yeah.
And like I always say, economic management goes with being open and how information moves, okay? Let's not downplay the psychical and psychological dictate, of some of these things. It's very, very important because, if you're going into negotiations and then you have a powerful person, sitting there, sometimes it's one way or the other, and not just being powerful, communicating, the economic situation, and then also promising you that, going forward, if things get better, the usual, situation where we used to have that kind of asymmetry in tightening of belt, where the politician would tell you that let's tighten our belt, and then they will be having a belt loosened on the other end. Will be no more. It gives that kind of confidence. And I believe that is what, brought about that kind of level of, wage increase that we are seeing now.
Okay.
So, and which is also not away from the normal, the usual trend, because if you look at the past years, with the exception of, last year and then the year before, clearly you will see, that the wage increase has always been hovering around, 10, 11, thereabout. So from where I sit, this is not out of the norm. Again, what, brought about this kind of level of increase is one, the expectations in inflation that is likely to go down, which the labor knows. And then again, looking at the pass-through effect of some of the taxes that government has promised to remove them, indirect taxes, let me put it that way. Government has promised to remove them, which feeds into prices. Okay, so labor knowing very well that receiving their salary at the end of the day, going forward, if those taxes are scrapped and then expectations and inflation, comes down, their, disposable income is going to have, something to buy, or maybe it's going to be powerful in terms of purchases. So that is why, that level of 10%, I'm not surprised at it.
Okay. All right. But the labor consultant, Austin Gami, has described the recent approval of 10% wage increase for public sector workers as excessive, warning that it could exacerbate inflationary pressures. Now, he says, even a 1% adjustment in public sector wage could push the economy into a higher inflationary bracket, ultimately affecting everyone, including the beneficiaries of the wage increase.
I think we have to be careful. We have to be careful how we throw in, inflation in relation to, wage increase. We are talking about expected inflation here, not past inflation. If expected inflation has a tendency of going down, then obviously increasing wage, I don't think it will create much problem. And then also, let's not forget that, liquidity has been a problem. Cash has been dried up in the economy for some time now. And I can tell you, there's no single penny that will drop in people's pocket that will not have anything to do. the inflation that Ghana has been battling with, I always say that it has been, the upper part of the economy's inflation. That is between Bank of Ghana and the banks, which, the Bank of Ghana thinks, okay, fine, they've pumping more money into the economy. That will be sitting at the bank level. But trust me, through economic activities within the ordinary level, you don't really see that kind of inflation happening because you see a lot of empty pockets, a lot of people walking around without jobs. Do you think those walking around without jobs, when they get money into their pocket, they'll be pricing things anyhow for us to say that more money will be chasing few goods? No, it's not as we see. So from where I sit, I don't think this increment will cause any inflation because the economy has been operating below capacity. The measure of inflation that Bank of Ghana has been chasing has been, between them and then the banks. And so from where I sit, I don't think at that ordinary level, we're going to have, inflation.
I mean, workers in the public sector, I mean, the numbers are huge. Are you debunking that there could be an effect when they get more money and chasing some fewer goods? Or is your point that there will be too many goods such that the monies won't be a lot of money chasing fewer goods?
You see, what is happening is that when you talk about inflation, I mean, the definition from the textbooks will tell you that, look, when you have, more money chasing few goods, there's a tendency that prices will go up. That is what, happens. But then I can tell you in the Ghanaian economy, inflation at the lower level is very, very low. Let's try to, categorize inflation at the upper level of the economy and then the lower level. I mean, if you talk about, you saw your video going around, those who were eating, down on the street, telling you that, I mean, they don't have money. The economy is dried up. And so with that increment will be meaningless to them. Do you think such a person, getting an increment of about, let's say, 50%, who will be chasing, ice water at a price of 5 cedi? I don't think so. So at that lower level, inflation is, very, very low. But then if you look at, the top level, I mean, I always say that Bank of Ghana has been chasing inflation at the upper echelon of the economy, which, I mean, for me, I think that's not an economy. It's not an inclusive economy. It's an economy where you have, some people getting free money here and there. We think those free monies that they are getting, as a result of that, they'll be pricing things anyhow. And that is exactly what is, we see in the housing market and all those. You see some prices of houses that are so exorbitant that the ordinary person on the street cannot even afford, how to buy ice water. So from where I sit, I don't think, this increment will cause any problem.
All right.
Not at all.
Okay. Let me come to Professor Body. Prof, so if you look at where we are today in terms of, the president even says our economy isn't strong at all. I mean, I'm trying to paraphrase from what he said there. But like Austin Game said, 10% is quite on the high side. Can the economy, sustain this 10% rise we are giving to public sector workers?
Yes, from the video that I watched when the president sat in a meeting with the labor union, was reassuring for a president to sit in a meeting of such sort to discuss matters of wages and all that. Reassuring. But the question I asked on that day, for how long can the president be sitting in such meetings, giving assurance to people? Because demand for wage increment will never stop. So in every year, are we going to have presidents sitting in such meetings to assure people?
I'm sure this is a one-off.
Well, we are yet to be told. What will be the role of that minister in charge? They made his powers. So I wish our ministers would take this battle and have a very good negotiation skills to deal with such matters. Let's put that one on the side. The other thing that you asked, Austin Game's position, he looked at it in two areas.
Yeah.
One, can we put performance management system in place to determine And two, he said, and any increment, even in 1%, will throw the economy to jail, to cause inflation. We should also understand that there's a bi-directional relationship between wage increments and inflation.
Okay.
Wage increment can cause inflation. And inflation can also cause wage increment.
But like Prof. Mensah explains there, the 10% is not that huge to cause inflation because people won't be chasing goods with the little that they will be getting on their monies.
Well, if I take the first one, how can wage increment cause inflation? When people, salaries or wages are increased, individual will have a higher income, and that therefore they will demand for more product. If those things that they're demanding for are not there, and that is what it can cause inflation.
Okay.
And when inflation, we said it can also cause wage increment. Yes. When goods and services are high, and people are not having the means to do that, they will demand for a higher wage. So which one has caused the other? That's what we need to find out. If indeed it's the inflation that we are going through that has caused people to demand for, then 10%, is it enough? Or it's not enough? We're here to see. But for me, I think it should have gone out a bit.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, at what point did our president know that things are difficult, things are hard?
Having assumed the reins and getting exposed to the realities.
Oh, really?
Yeah. From 7th January, that's when he assumed the reins of power. He's been going through the books.
Well, he's been very honest, and I'm sure any government should be very honest when they see things are not going on the way they assume. They come out clearly and tell the nation. I mean, you eat your humble pie, it's fine. But my advice is that sometimes when we are behind the scene, be careful what we say, because it's likely going to change when we take over. And this is what we are seeing.
All right. But I mean, I wanted us to look at where the economy is. You are calling for more, that the increase should have been more. But we're under an IMF program. We know our financial constraint. Could we have managed more? And can the economy even sustain the 10%?
Well, I think if you look at the fiscal responsibility or fiscal impact, anytime you want to touch a salary, base salary or base pay, it will have effects on the other items. Because when you do that, you also will have to increase other components as well that will come with it. And will have impact on the budget. And have impact on our economy. How much is enough is yet to be determined. 10%. They called for, what was the percentage? I think we were looking for more than 10. So, but this morning, your data analyst did a very good job by giving us an average figure over the period, between 10 to 11. I'm not asking for 20% or 30%. But then, I think that 15 or 17, as a country, we can absorb.
17%?
Or 15%, we can absorb. Yeah, we have seen this before. But my challenge is that we should know as a country our position, financial responsibilities, what we have to do. But we should not use some of these things on political platform, because when you assume power, it's a different thing. And I'm happy that, well, the labor union, the negotiators have taken this in good faith, and it leaves the matter to rest. We've given, you demanded for, of course, workers' union will not go and demand for 5.2%. Do they have demand for a higher figure? And it's up to the government to negotiate. That's why we often sit on table and discuss this. Plus or minus, we come out with an agreement and we say, well, we can pay 10% or 5%. For me, judging from where we stand as a country, the cost of living, rent, transportation, electricity, unless, of course, we are going to reduce other taxes.
Which they promised to do.
Good. So if that is a part, that's a plan, then we can accept this for now. If that is also an increase, workers will come back again. And let's look at the other effects on the private sector. They also will demand for their employers.
Yeah.
So they also increase their own.
Private sector usually sometimes that's more than the daily minimum wage.
Yeah,
but
we don't hear.
Yeah, obviously when it comes up,
don't hear.
That's for it. Let me go back to Professor Lord Mensah. Prof, there have been arguments that we need to tie wage increases to productivity. At what point can we say that it's the right time for us to begin such a system where your productivity will determine how much you're paid in the public sector?
Yeah, I mean, as we speak now, it is like that. I mean,
in the public sector?
Yes, of course. I mean, you look at the kind of, you see, when you talk about productivity, the measurability sometimes in most of the public sector works sometimes will be difficult. I mean, we're looking at the number of hours the person spends at work. The person can go to work and sit there for hours without, producing even a single paper. At the end of the day, he has spent the hours there. And we are using the number of hours spent at work to determine, the output of the person. Again, we are not looking at brick and mortar, kind of work where you will say, okay, fine, when you come to work, you have to lay, blocks of about, 10 layers before we can determine that this is your output. So it needs some systems and which we need some kind of investment in that. But then let me go back to tell you that workers normally demand pay increase at a certain level depending on the expectations in inflation. Again, government, having a president sitting at the midst of, salary negotiations, promising that when things get better, they can shift, the spine, the single spine I'm talking about here. If you look at the single spine, okay, over the years, governments have been trying to avoid the increment in, single spine because they think it will cost them more to do that. And if you have a president that has sat in negotiations to give assurance that when things get improved, they may look at the entire single spine and see how, they can move the spine to a level. All these years, most of the pay negotiations across the labor front has been on allowances. And that is why usually when the minimum, the minimum wage goes up, it bounces into all the allowances. And I can tell you that because government has failed to negotiate on the spine, it is affecting pensions as well, because pensions are paid on basic salaries and therefore, not on allowances. And so you will see a typical worker in Ghana enjoying during his active, years in service, but when he goes on pension, it becomes a problem. Difficult life, to have. So from where I sit,
sorry, not cutting you, but when the increase is on the base pay, you say it doesn't affect the pensions?
When there's an increase on the base pay, it affects the pensions, but then the quantums of leap in increasing the base pay is not as much as compared to how inflation has been growing in the country. So, by so doing, obviously the pensioner suffers when he goes on pension. But then let me tell you that, yes, indeed, we have to differentiate between what we call, expected inflation and realized inflation. If you're talking about past inflation, then obviously you will say that we may need, more. We may need more increment because inflation has been hovering around, 54. And then just yesterday or last 3 days, reading through the papers, inflation has reduced to 23.50%.
Yeah.
But then that means that you expect the wage, minimum wage to be increased within the same neighborhood of, 23.5%. But that is not the case. We are looking at expected inflation as a result of possible, tax cuts that the government has promised. We know the pass-through effect of, taxes, which is price increase at the ordinary level. Okay, so excuse me.
Yeah.
The government has promised, a tax cut, which the pass-through effect obviously is going to be, price stability. Then, you don't expect that, labor will demand, more. So I think the 10% is quite okay. If you look at what is happening on the ground, what is expected to happen in the future.
Okay. All right then. So we all agree that there should be a system to measure productivity in the public sector, right?
Yeah. I think measuring performance has been a problem. Always. But there are systems.
Because like Prof said there, you don't know what will determine that if I come to work, what will really measure what I do. There should be that thing to tell me that if you come today and you provide a sheet, that then means that you've performed your role.
I agree with him. It's been like this over the years. And my question is, can't we do it as a country? Can't we have a proper way of measuring public service, that sector? If you leave it like this, successive governments will give reasons. It happened in the previous administration. We can't take any administration out. But elsewhere, they've done it. They're able to measure productivity or the performance of staff. In fact, we are now looking at whether the increment is right or how much is supposed to be given. We don't have any way of measuring. We've done it just in a gross, we've given a figure. And that's what we are debating. Is it high? Is it low? But you have something to measure on the performance of these individuals. Then we can have a better conversations on it. But we should also not forget that there's something called productivity gap, which must also be emphasized. If you have wage growth and that outpaces productivity growth, obviously business, they will ask for a higher wages. When there's a difference between the wage growth and productivity gains over the period, people will demand for instance, if you have 10%, now there's a 10% increment in the wages. If we have productivity growth about 2%, then the labor cost per unit output will be about 8%. What it means that we will demand for a higher increment. 10% of wage growth against a 2% of productivity growth or so. We have a difference of 8%.
Okay.
And that will determine the labor cost per unit output over the period. People will demand for, just given a hypothetical figure. So we should focus on the productivity gap that we have. When there's a gap, there will be a demand for.
But isn't that in the KPIs we give to people we employ in the public sector? Or are we saying that we don't give KPIs to everybody we employ in the sector?
There's one thing given, and another thing ensuring that those things are done. Who monitors? We have M&Es attached to various organizations and government sectors. How often do they measure performance? And what are the, just my good friend said, Lord, what are the indicators? You can state those things on your contract, on your letter, employment letters, your KPIs. But who is there to monitor? The frequency of monitoring this. Is it monthly, quarterly, annually? So every year we'll sit on a table to discuss salary-related wages. We should also be able to provide performance of these organizations, these sectors. Labor unions must also provide that. When you're going to sit and negotiate for this, provide other data that will help in determining this. And it will be fun.
Performance driven.
Yeah.
So is it advice to government that it's time government begins such a thing? And whose responsibility should it be? Just the minister or who else?
Well, who appoints, who gives jobs. It must be someone who will employ you. So before you walk into my organization, I'll give you your contracts. In the letter, or the employment letter, I state the KPIs. When I state those things, they are not there. Look, I will monitor. I will ensure that you do. Because why do you get a good result from the private sectors? Why do we do that? Because they are able to monitor regularly. They know that a task is given and you don't fulfill, you don't do this. Go to the telcos. You know the number of calls you pick in a day. Someone is listening to your calls. How effective you are. And we can give you letters. You are doing well. So the next time you are asking for increment, we have your record. We know what you have done. And that will not be a problem.
But if you're monitoring the person's call, you are intruding into the person's private space.
Oh, no, that's what they are. Oh, it's not all the time.
Okay.
We have, I don't know the name they have. Just to enhance.
You mean the office line?
The office line. I mean, they have the back office also. Just to make sure that the person they are put in charge to be picking calls and not is doing the right thing, not to monitor calls of other people. I mean, the way you communicate with the client, your ability to respond to the request and issues, your turnaround time. These are KPIs also. I'm just giving an example.
Okay. Professor Lord Mensah, the minimum daily wage is 19.97. That's above $1. Are we on the right path? Or should there be more?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask for more, there's always, a lookout for more. I mean, let me put it that way. But then at the end of the day, you also have to look at the economic output of whatever is being, pumped into the economy. You see, when you look at the budget of the public, right, you'll come to appreciate that salaries and compensations is one of the inputs, which is at the expenditure side. But then you have to ask yourself, what revenue are we generating from, this, salary input to determine, that increase? And we're talking about efficiency here because whatever increment we look out for, we may have to measure, how, it will fall up output. So at the end of the day, over the years, if it has turned up that revenue increase has not been as expected, because the same labor you are spending on are the same labor that we have to, use them to generate the necessary revenue through taxes and other, economic output. So effectively, if the economic output has not been growing as expected, then obviously you should expect that, you will not get as much as, it's supposed to be. Let's relate this to, the GDP growth that we had in the past, years, even though talking about in terms of measuring the GDP as a result of, revenue generation may not be as much as we need. The economy was growing around 4.3, thereabout percent.
Okay.
How do we, have, a salary increase that will go beyond, the economic growth? So generally, we have to look at it as a system that we are managing.
Okay. All right.
If you're managing a system, you have to look at the input and then look at the output, and that is a true indicator of efficiency. And so, if the output is not, that as it's supposed to be, we cannot see an increment that will correspond to those outputs. But like I said earlier, it has to do with the future.
Okay.
Once the expectations of the future looks good, every government will be ready to share what is on the table with its people. So obviously, this is what we should expect.
Grateful to you, Professor Lord Mensah. I'm grateful that you could join us. He is a professor of finance at the University of Ghana. In studio, Professor Isaac Body is Dean, Accounting and Finance, UPSA. Prof, I would have to leave you because there's something you have to bounce. I'm grateful to you for joining us here on the show. But wherever you are, you can also join us with your comment on our social media platforms so that we can have this conversation together about our country, Ghana. But just ahead on the show, we are talking philanthropy. And there's someone who's done so much in terms of helping a community in the Ashanti region called Ebusia. would let you in on what the people are doing. Apostle Waynette T. Jackson is here to share with us those incredible transformation that he and his organization are doing in the Ebusia community in the Ashanti region. You would want to stay for that wonderful conversation. We'll be back.